You think you understand what it means to be human, but you're wrong. You've been living a lie wrapped in comfortable delusions, believing that beneath the surface, people are fundamentally good, that society will catch you when you fall, that fairness and justice are natural laws rather than fragile constructs held together by force and fear. Thomas Hobbes knew better. He saw through the veneer of civilization to the brutal machinery underneath, and he used that knowledge not to become a monster, but to become something far more dangerous, a man who could not be broken. Listen carefully, because what I'm about to tell you will either liberate you or terrify you, and quite possibly both. Hobbes didn't train himself to feel nothing because he was cold or heartless. He trained himself to feel nothing because he understood that in a world where life is solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short, emotional vulnerability is a luxury you cannot afford. Every feeling you allow to control you, every emotional reaction you have to the actions of others, every moment you spend hoping for justice or fairness or basic human decency, these are not signs of your humanity. They are weapons that others will use against you. The first lesson Hobbes learned, and the first lesson you must learn, is that the natural state of humanity is war. Not the kind of war with guns and trenches and battlefields, but the constant grinding war of all against all. Every interaction you have is a negotiation of power. Every conversation is a test of strength. Every relationship is a contract where both parties are constantly calculating whether they're getting more than they're giving. This isn't cynicism. This is clarity. The sooner you accept this fundamental truth about human nature, the sooner you can stop being surprised when people disappoint you, betray you, or abandon you when it serves their interests. You've been conditioned to believe that acknowledging this reality makes you a bad person. You've been taught that recognizing the inherent selfishness and brutality of human nature somehow diminishes your own capacity for goodness. This is the greatest lie ever told. Understanding that people are fundamentally self-interested doesn't make you selfish. It makes you strategic. Recognizing that loyalty is conditional doesn't make you disloyal. It makes you discerning. Accepting that most human relationships are transactional doesn't make you transactional. It makes you realistic about what you can expect from others and what others can reasonably expect from you. Hobbes trained himself to feel nothing, not because he wanted to become emotionless, but because he wanted to become uncontrollable. When you react emotionally to every slight, every injustice, every moment when life fails to meet your expectations, you are handing control of your internal state to external forces. You are allowing the chaos of the world to dictate your peace of mind. You are giving other people the power to determine whether you have a good day or a bad day, whether you feel confident or insecure, whether you move forward with purpose or remain paralyzed by resentment and hurt. The man who cannot be made angry cannot be manipulated through his anger. The woman who does not desperately need approval cannot be controlled through the withholding of that approval. The person who has accepted that disappointment is the default state of human interaction cannot be devastated by betrayal because they never expected loyalty in the first place. This is not about becoming cold or cruel. This is about becoming free. You have been taught to value emotional authenticity above all else, to express your feelings openly and honestly, to wear your heart on your sleeve as a badge of moral superiority. But Hobbes understood that emotional transparency is emotional suicide in a world where everyone is looking for leverage over everyone else. When you show people exactly what hurts you, you are teaching them exactly how to hurt you. When you reveal what you desperately want, you are showing them exactly what to use as bait to manipulate you. When you display your fears and insecurities, you are handing them a roadmap to your psychological destruction. The strong do not survive because they are physically powerful or intellectually superior, though these things help. The strong survive because they are emotionally inaccessible. They have trained themselves to remain calm when others are losing their minds, to think clearly when others are drowning in their feelings, to act with purpose when others are paralyzed by their emotional reactions to circumstances beyond their control. This emotional discipline is not natural. It is cultivated through deliberate practice and unflinching self-examination. Look at your life right now and identify every area where you are controlled by your emotional reactions. Notice how you respond when someone doesn't text you back quickly enough, when you don't get the recognition you think you deserve, when someone treats you with less respect than you believe you've earned, when life fails to unfold according to your expectations. Each of these reactions is a chain around your neck, and you have been your own jailer. You have allowed your happiness, your confidence, your sense of self-worth to be dependent on variables you cannot control. the actions and opinions of other people, the fairness or unfairness of circumstances, the alignment of reality with your desires. Hobbes knew that the only sustainable source of power is the power that comes from within, the power that cannot be given or taken away by others. This power is built through the systematic elimination of emotional dependency on external validation. It is built through the conscious choice to find your center in your own judgment rather than in the approval of others. It is built through the disciplined practice of observing your emotional reactions without being controlled by them, of feeling without drowning, of caring without clinging. The world will tell you that this approach is heartless, that it makes you less human, that it cuts you off from authentic connection with others. This is projection from people who have never experienced the freedom that comes from emotional independence. They mistake emotional neediness for depth, vulnerability for authenticity, and reactivity for passion. They have confused being easily hurt with being sensitive, being easily manipulated with being caring, and being emotionally unstable with being alive. True strength is not the absence of feeling, it is the mastery of feeling. It is the ability to feel deeply without being derailed by those feelings, to care about outcomes without being destroyed when those outcomes don't materialize, to love people while remaining clear-eyed about their limitations and your own. This is what Hobbes understood and what you must learn. Emotional mastery is not about becoming a robot. It's about becoming a human being who cannot be broken by the inevitable disappointments and betrayals that define the human experience. The social contract that Hobbes described, the agreement we make to give up certain freedoms in exchange for protection from the chaos of the natural state, is not just a political theory. It is a psychological strategy. When you stop expecting the world to be fair, you stop being outraged by its unfairness. When you stop expecting people to be consistently loyal, you stop being devastated by their inconsistency. When you stop expecting life to make sense, you stop being paralyzed by its randomness. This is not resignation. This is liberation. You have been operating under the assumption that your emotional reactions are involuntary, that you cannot help how you feel, that your feelings are simply something that happens to you rather than something you can direct and control. This is learned helplessness masquerading as emotional authenticity. Your feelings are not sacred truths that must be honored and expressed. They are information that can be processed and utilized. Some feelings deserve your attention and action. Others deserve to be acknowledged and dismissed. The difference between emotional maturity and emotional chaos is the ability to distinguish between the two. Hobbes trained himself to feel nothing not because he was incapable of love or joy or compassion, but because he understood that these emotions, when uncontrolled, become liabilities. Love becomes dependency. Joy becomes addiction to circumstances. Compassion becomes a weapon others use to manipulate your choices. The goal is not to eliminate these emotions, but to experience them from a position of strength rather than weakness, to offer them as gifts rather than as desperate attempts to fill voids in your own psychological foundation. The people who will tell you that this approach is wrong are the same people who are controlled by their emotions, who make decisions based on how they feel rather than what makes strategic sense, who are constantly at the mercy of their own psychological reactions to events beyond their control. They are drowning in their own emotional instability and they want you to drown with them. Misery loves company, but more than that, emotional chaos requires validation from others to justify its existence. When you become emotionally self-sufficient, you become a mirror that reflects back their own weakness, and they will resent you for it. The transformation Hobbes underwent and the transformation you must undergo requires you to stop seeing yourself as a victim of your circumstances and start seeing yourself as the architect of your responses to those circumstances. Every day, life will present you with situations designed to trigger your emotional reactions. People will disrespect you, ignore you, disappoint you, betray you. Opportunities will be given to others who deserve them less. Justice will be delayed or denied entirely. The question is not whether these things will happen. They will. The question is whether you will remain centered and strategic in your response, or whether you will be hijacked by your emotional reactions and rendered ineffective. This is where most people fail. They believe that their emotional reactions are justified by the circumstances that trigger them. They think that because someone treated them poorly, their anger is righteous. Because they were overlooked for a promotion, their resentment is warranted. Because they were betrayed by someone they trusted, their bitterness is understandable. They are correct. These reactions are justified, warranted, and understandable. They are also completely useless and often counterproductive. Hobbes understood that the universe does not care about your feelings. Reality is not interested in your emotional responses to the events that unfold around you. The world will continue to operate according to its own brutal logic regardless of whether you are happy or sad, angry or calm, hopeful or despairing. Your emotions are utterly irrelevant to the functioning of the universe, but they are absolutely central to your ability to navigate that universe effectively. When you allow your emotions to control your actions, you are voluntarily handicapping yourself in a game where everyone else is playing to win. The person who remains calm when others are panicking has an enormous strategic advantage. The person who can think clearly when others are drowning in their feelings can identify opportunities that emotional people miss. The person who does not need constant validation and approval from others can make decisions based on long-term strategic thinking rather than short-term emotional satisfaction. This is not about becoming inhuman. This is about becoming optimally human. You think you know what power looks like because you've been conditioned to associate power with external displays of dominance, wealth, status, or control over others. But these are just the symptoms of power, not power itself. Real power is internal. It is the ability to remain centered regardless of external circumstances. It is the capacity to make decisions based on clear thinking rather than emotional reactions. It is the freedom that comes from not needing anything from anyone else to feel complete, secure, or valuable. The strongest position you can occupy in any relationship, any negotiation, any conflict, is the position of not needing a particular outcome. When you can walk away from anything, a job, a relationship, a deal, a situation, without being emotionally devastated, you have all the power. When you need something desperately, when your emotional well-being depends on getting what you want, you have no power at all. You are at the mercy of forces beyond your control, and those forces will inevitably disappoint you. Hobbes saw that most people live their entire lives as emotional hostages, held captive by their own needs, desires, expectations, and reactions. They are prisoners of their own psychology, constantly triggered by events they cannot control, constantly disappointed by outcomes they cannot guarantee, constantly hurt by people they cannot change. They mistake this emotional volatility for depth and passion, but it is actually weakness disguised as authenticity. The journey from emotional chaos to emotional mastery is not comfortable. It requires you to confront the ways you have been giving your power away, the ways you have been allowing external circumstances to determine your internal state, the ways you have been depending on other people to provide you with things you should be providing for yourself. It requires you to acknowledge that many of your strongest emotions are not responses to what is actually happening, but reactions to the gap between what is happening and what you expected or wanted to happen. Most of your suffering is not caused by what people do to you. It is caused by the difference between what people do to you and what you think they should do to you. Most of your anger is not a response to how you are treated. It is a response to the difference between how you are treated and how you believe you deserve to be treated. Most of your disappointment is not caused by what you don't get. It is caused by the difference between what you don't get and what you expected to receive. This gap between expectation and reality, between desire and outcome, between what you think should happen and what actually happens, this is the source of most human misery, and it is completely unnecessary. When you stop expecting the world to conform to your desires, you stop being disappointed when it doesn't. When you stop believing that people should treat you fairly, you stop being outraged when they don't. When you stop thinking that life owes you anything, you stop feeling cheated when it gives you less than you wanted. This is not about lowering your standards or accepting mediocrity. This is about freeing yourself from the psychological prison of unmet expectations. It is about choosing to engage with reality as it is, rather than as you wish it were. It is about recognizing that your happiness and peace of mind are too important to be left dependent on variables you cannot control. Hobbes lived through the English Civil War, a time when the social order collapsed and people showed their true nature without the restraints of civilization. He saw neighbors turn against neighbors, friends betray friends, and the thin veneer of social cooperation dissolve into naked self-interest and violence. This experience taught him that the peace and prosperity most people take for granted are not natural states. They are artificial constructs maintained through force and the threat of force. They can disappear at any moment, and when they do, you will discover who you really are underneath all your social conditioning. The question is, who will you be when the comfortable illusions are stripped away? Will you be someone who collapses under the weight of reality? Or will you be someone who is already prepared for it? Will you be someone who is destroyed by the discovery that life is unfair and people are selfish? Or will you be someone who has already made peace with these truths and built their strength on more solid foundations? The strong are not those who are protected from hardship. The strong are those who have trained themselves to thrive in hardship. They are not those who are surrounded by loyal friends and fair circumstances. They are those who can succeed even when surrounded by enemies and unfair circumstances. They are not those who have never been betrayed or disappointed. They are those who have been betrayed and disappointed so many times that they have become immune to the psychological damage these experiences typically cause. This immunity is not natural. It is developed through deliberate exposure to discomfort, through conscious practice in emotional regulation, through systematic training in the art of not needing external validation or approval. It is built through the daily choice to respond to setbacks with strategy rather than emotion, to treat obstacles as information rather than injustice, to view other people's behavior as data about them rather than evidence about your own worth. When you master this approach, something remarkable happens. You become dangerous in the best possible way. Not dangerous because you will hurt others, but dangerous because you cannot be hurt by others. Not dangerous because you are aggressive or hostile, but dangerous because you are uncontrollable. You cannot be manipulated through your emotions because your emotions are under your control. You cannot be intimidated through threats because you have already accepted the worst-case scenarios. You cannot be bribed with approval because you do not depend on approval for your sense of self-worth. This makes you incredibly valuable and incredibly threatening at the same time. Valuable because people who cannot be emotionally manipulated are rare and powerful allies. Threatening because people who cannot be controlled through emotional manipulation cannot be controlled at all, and this makes those who depend on emotional manipulation for their own power deeply uncomfortable. You will find that as you develop this emotional independence, your relationships will change dramatically. Some people will be drawn to your stability and strength. Others will be repelled by your refusal to participate in the emotional chaos that defines most human interactions. The people who are accustomed to controlling others through emotional manipulation will especially resent your transformation, because you will no longer be available as a target for their psychological games. This is not a loss. This is a filtering process. The people who remain in your life will be those who appreciate your strength, rather than those who seek to exploit your weakness. The relationships that survive will be based on mutual respect and genuine connection rather than emotional dependency and manipulation. You will discover that you can love more freely when you are not desperately seeking love from others, that you can give more generously when you are not constantly calculating what you are receiving in return. But the greatest gift of this transformation is not how it changes your relationships with others. It is how it changes your relationship with yourself. When you are no longer at the mercy of your own emotional reactions, when you no longer need constant validation from external sources, when you are no longer devastated by every setback and disappointment, you discover a kind of peace that most people never experience. It is the peace that comes from being genuinely self-sufficient, not just financially or practically, but emotionally and psychologically. This is what Hobbes discovered and what you must discover. The only reliable source of security in an insecure world is your own inner stability. The only trustworthy source of validation in a world full of people who will use your need for validation against you is your own clear assessment of your worth and capabilities. The only protection against the inevitable betrayals and disappointments of human existence is the knowledge that you can survive and thrive regardless of what others do or don't do. You were not put on this earth to be comfortable. You were not designed to live a life free from conflict, challenge, or disappointment. You were not promised fairness, justice, or happiness as a birthright. You were given consciousness, intelligence, and will, and your task is to use these tools to navigate a world that is fundamentally chaotic and unpredictable. The sooner you accept this reality, the sooner you can stop wasting energy fighting against it and start using that energy to master it. Hobbes trained himself to feel nothing because he understood that feelings, while natural and sometimes useful, are not reliable guides for decision-making in a world where survival and success depend on clear thinking and strategic action. Your feelings are valid, but they are not always accurate. Your emotions provide information, but they do not always provide correct information. Your heart may tell you to trust someone who will betray you, to pursue something that will destroy you, to avoid something that could save you. The goal is not to become emotionless. It is to become the master of your emotions rather than their slave. It is to feel what you feel without being controlled by what you feel, to acknowledge your emotional reactions without being hijacked by them, to use your emotions as one source of information among many, rather than as the primary driver of your decisions and actions. This mastery is the foundation of all other forms of power and success. Until you can control your own internal state, you cannot effectively control anything else. Until you can remain calm under pressure, you cannot make good decisions when pressure is applied. Until you can think clearly when others are losing their minds, you cannot take advantage of the opportunities that chaos creates. Until you can act strategically when others are acting emotionally, you cannot compete effectively in a world where everyone is competing for limited resources and opportunities. The brutal truth that Hobbes understood, and that you must understand, is that life is a competition, whether you choose to participate or not. Resources are limited. Opportunities are finite. Other people are competing for the same things you want, and they will not hesitate to use every advantage they can find, including your own emotional weaknesses, to defeat you. This is not evil. This is nature. This is reality. This is the world you must navigate. You can choose to see this reality as depressing and unfair, or you can choose to see it as clarifying and liberating. When you understand that everyone is primarily motivated by self-interest, you stop being hurt by their selfishness and start planning for it. When you recognize that loyalty is conditional and temporary, you stop being devastated by betrayal and start building systems that don't depend on absolute loyalty. When you accept that life is fundamentally unfair, you stop wasting energy demanding fairness and start focusing on effectiveness. The person who has made peace with these truths has an enormous advantage over those who are still fighting against them. While others are paralyzed by disappointment, you are adapting to new circumstances. While others are consumed by resentment, you are identifying new opportunities. While others are demanding justice, you are creating your own security. While others are hoping for rescue, you are engineering your own salvation. This is not about becoming cynical or cruel. This is about becoming realistic and effective. You can still be kind, generous, and loving. You can still form deep connections and meaningful relationships. You can still work for justice and fight against suffering. But you will do all of these things from a position of strength rather than weakness, from clarity rather than confusion, from choice rather than compulsion. When you no longer need to be saved, you become capable of saving others. When you no longer need to be validated, you become capable of validating others authentically. When you no longer need to be loved desperately, you become capable of loving freely. This is the paradox that Hobbes understood. The path to genuine connection with others runs through radical self-sufficiency, and the path to authentic compassion runs through absolute emotional independence. The world needs people who cannot be broken, manipulated, or controlled. It needs people who remain calm in crisis, clear in chaos, and strategic under pressure. It needs people who can make difficult decisions without being paralyzed by emotion, who can tell the truth without being destroyed by the consequences, who can stand alone without being crushed by isolation. These people are not born. They are forged through deliberate practice in the art of emotional mastery. You have a choice. You can continue to live as an emotional hostage, constantly triggered by events beyond your control, constantly disappointed by outcomes you cannot guarantee, constantly hurt by people you cannot change. Or you can begin the difficult but liberating work of training yourself to feel nothing that you don't choose to feel, to need nothing that you cannot provide for yourself, to depend on nothing that can be taken away from you without your consent. This is not the easy path. It is the powerful path. It is not the comfortable choice. It is the free choice. It is not what most people will understand or support. It is what you must do if you want to become genuinely strong rather than merely appearing strong, genuinely independent rather than merely claiming independence, genuinely powerful rather than simply holding temporary positions of external power. Hobbes saw clearly what most people refuse to see, that beneath all the social pleasantries and moral posturing, human beings are animals competing for survival and advantage. Understanding this does not make you an animal. It makes you conscious of your animal nature, so that you can transcend it through discipline and wisdom. Acknowledging the brutality of human nature does not make you brutal. It makes you strategic about how you engage with that brutality in yourself and others. The strong do not survive because they are the most aggressive or the most ruthless. They survive because they are the most realistic about what they're dealing with and the most disciplined in their responses to it. They have trained themselves to see clearly without being overwhelmed by what they see, to act effectively without being paralyzed by the complexity of their circumstances, to remain centered without being naive about the forces that seek to destabilize them. This is your choice and your challenge, to see the world as it is rather than as you wish it were, to respond to reality rather than to your fantasies about reality, to build your strength on truths rather than on comfortable lies. The path forward is clear, even if it is not easy. Train yourself to feel nothing that weakens you, master everything that strengthens you, and never forget that in a world where most people are controlled by their emotions, the person who controls their emotions controls everything else.